Animals are complex,
Animals are
multicellular
complex
organisms
multicellular
that
organisms
require a
that
mechanism
require
for
a mechanism
transporting
for
nutrients
transporting
throughout their
nutrients
bodies and
throughout their
removing
bodies
wastes.
and removing waste.
The human circulatory
The
system
human
has a
circulatory
complex
system
network
has a
of blood
complex
vessels
network of
that
blood
reach all
vessels
parts of the
that
body.
reach all parts
This
of the body.
extensive network supplies
This
the
extensive
cells, tissues,
network
and organs
supplies
with
the
oxygen
cells,
and
tissues, and
nutrients,
organs with oxygen
and
and
removes carbon
nutrients,
dioxide
and
and
remove
waste
carbon dioxide
compounds.
and waste
The
compounds.
medium for transport of gases and
The
other
medium
molecules is the blood, which continually circulates through the
for
system.
transport
Pressure
of
differences within
gases
the
and other
system
molecules
cause the
is the
movement
blood,
of the blood
which
and are
continually
created by the
circulates
pumping
through
of the
the
heart.
system. Pressure
Gas exchange between
differences
tissues and the
within the
blood
system
is an
cause the
essential
movement
function of
of
the
the blood
circulatory system.
and are
In
created
humans,
by
other
the
mammals,
pumping
and birds, blood absorbs
blah,
oxygen
blah,
and releases carbon dioxide in the lungs. Thus, the circulatory and respiratory system, whose function is to obtain oxygen and discharge carbon dioxide, work in tandem. The learning objectives for these lessons are to describe the passage of air from the outside environment to the lungs, to describe the function of the circulatory system, to describe the cardiac cycle, and to explain how blood flows through the body. Take a breath and hold it. Wait several seconds and then let it out. Humans, when they are not exerting themselves, breathe approximately 15 times per minute on average. This equates to about 90 breaths per an hour, or 21,600 breaths per day. With every inhalation, air fills the lungs, and with every exhalation, it rushes back out. The air is doing more than just inflating and deflating the lungs in the chest cavity. The air contains oxygen that crosses the lung tissue, enters the bloodstream, and travels to organs and tissues. There, oxygen is exchanged for carbon dioxide, which is a cellular waste material. Carbon dioxide exits the cells, enters the bloodstream, travels back to the lungs, and is expired out of the body during exhalation. Breathing is both a voluntary and involuntary event. How often a breath is taken and how much air is inhaled or exhaled is regulated by the respiratory center in the brain. In response to signals it receives about the carbon dioxide content of the blood. However, it is possible to override this automatic regulation for activities such as speaking, singing, and swimming underwater. During inhalation, the diaphragm descends, creating a negative pressure around the lungs, and they begin to inflate, drawing in air from outside the body. The air enters the body through the nasal cavity located just inside the nose. As the air passes through the nasal cavity, the air is warmed to body temperature and humidified by moisture from mucous membranes. These processes help equilibrate the air to the body conditions, reducing any damage that cold, dry air can cause. Particulate matter that is floating in the air is removed in the nasal passages by hairs, mucus, and cilia. Air is also chemically sampled by the sense of smell. From the nasal cavity, air passes through the pharynx or throat and the larynx or voice box as it makes its way to the trachea. The main function of the trachea is to funnel the inhaled air to the lungs and the exhaled air back out of the body. The human trachea is a cylinder about 25 to 30 centimeters, which sits in front of the esophagus and extends from the pharynx into the chest cavity to the lungs. It is made of incomplete rings of cartilage and smooth muscle. The cartilage provides strength and support to the trachea and keeps the passage open. The trachea is lined with cells that have cilia and secrete mucus. The mucus catches particles that have been inhaled, and the cilia move the particles toward the pharynx. The end of the trachea divides into two bronchi that enter the right and left lung. Air enters the lung through the primary bronchi. The primary bronchus divides, creating smaller and smaller diameter bronchi until the passages are under 1 millimeter in diameter, when they are called bronchioles as they split and spread through the lung. Like the trachea, the bronchus and bronchioles are made of cartilage and smooth muscle. Bronchi are innervated by nerves of both the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system that control muscle contraction, parasympathetic, or relaxation, sympathetic in the bronchi and bronchioles, depending on the nervous system cues. The final bronchioles are the respiratory bronchioles. Alveolar ducts are attached to the end of each respiratory bronchi. At the end of each duct are alveolar sacs, each containing 20 to 30 alveoli. Gas exchange occurs only in the alveoli. The alveoli are thin-walled and look like tiny bubbles within the sacs. The alveoli are in direct contact with the capillaries of their circulatory system. Such intimate contact ensures that oxygen will diffuse from the alveoli into the blood. In addition, carbon dioxide will diffuse from the blood into the alveoli to be exhaled. The anatomical arrangement of capillaries and alveoli emphasizes the structural and functional relationship of the respiratory and circulatory systems. Estimates from the surface area of alveoli in the lungs vary around 100 square meters. This large area is about the area of half a tennis court. This large surface area, combined with the thin-walled nature of the alveolar cells, allow gases to easily diffuse across the cells. The circulatory system is a network of vessels, the arteries, veins, and capillaries, and a pump, the heart. In all vertebrate organisms, this is a closed-loop system in which the blood is largely separated from the body's other extracellular fluid compartment, the interstitial fluid, which is the fluid bathing the cells. Blood circulates inside blood vessels and circulates unidirectionally from the heart around one of the two circulatory routes, then returns to the heart again. This is a closed circulatory system. Open circulatory systems are found in invertebrate animals, in which the circulatory fluid bathes the internal organs directly, even though it may be moved about with a pumping heart. The heart is a complex muscle that consists of two pumps, one that pumps blood through the pulmonary circulation to the lungs, and the other that pumps blood through the systemic circulation to the rest of the body's tissues and the heart itself. The heart is asymmetrical, with the left side being larger than the right side, correlating with the different sizes of the pulmonary and systemic circuits. In humans, the heart is about the size of a clenched fist. It is divided into 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles. There is 1 atrium and 1 ventricle on the right side and one atrium and one ventricle on the left side. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the systemic circulation through the major veins, the superior vena cava, which drains blood from the head and from the veins that come from the arms, as well as the inferior vena cava, which drains blood from the vein that comes from the lower organs and the legs. This deoxygenated blood then passes to the right ventricle through the tricuspid valve, which prevents the blockflow of blood. After it is filled, the right ventricle contracts, pumping the blood to the lungs for reoxygenation. The left atrium receives the oxygen-rich blood from the lungs. This blood passes through the bicuspid valve to the left ventricle, where the blood is pumped into the aorta. The aorta is the major artery of the body, taking oxygenated blood to the organs and muscles of the body. This pattern of pumping is referred as to a double circulation and is found in all mammals. The main purpose of the heart is to pump blood through the body. It does so in a repeating sequence called the cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle is the flow of blood through the heart coordinated by electrochemical signals that cause the heart muscle to contract and relax. In each cardiac cycle, a sequence of contractions pushes out the blood, pumping it through the body. This is followed by a relaxation phase where the heart fills with blood. These two phases are called syastole, or contraction, and diastole, or relaxation, respectively. The signal for contraction begins at a location on the outside of the right atrium. The electrochemical signal moves from there across the atria, causing them to contract. The contraction of the atria forces blood through the bulbs into the ventricles. Closing of these bulbs causes the contraction of the ventricles, produces a loud sound. The signal has by this time passed down the walls of the heart through a point between the right atrium and right ventricle. The signal then causes the ventricles to contract. The ventricles contract together, forcing blood into the aorta and the pulmonary arteries. Closing of the valves to these arteries, caused by blood being drawn back toward the heart during ventricular relaxation, produce a monosyllabic dub sound. The pumping of the heart is a function of the cardiac muscle cell or cardiomyocytes that make up the heart muscle. Cardiomyocytes are distinctive muscle cells that are striate like skeletal muscle but pump rhythmically and involuntarily like smooth muscle. Adjacent cells are connected by intercalated discs found only in cardiac muscle. These connections allow the electrical signal to travel directly to neighboring muscle cells. The electrical impulses in the heart produces electrical currents that flow through the body and can be measured on the skin using electrodes. This information can be observed as an electrocardiogram, or ECG for short, a recording of the electrical impulses of the cardiac muscle. The blood from the heart is carried through the body by a complex network of blood vessels. Arteries take blood away from the heart. The main artery of the systemic circulation is the aorta. It branches into major arteries that take blood to different limbs and organs. The aorta and arteries near the heart valve have heavy but elastic walls that respond to a smooth out the pressure differences caused by the beating heart. Arteries farther away from the heart have more muscle tissue in their walls that can constrict to affect flow rates of blood. The major arteries diverge into minor arteries and then smaller vessels called arterioles to reach more deeply into the muscles and organs of the body. Arterioles diverge into capillary beds. Capillary beds contain a large number, tens and thousands and hundreds of capillaries that branch among the cells of the body. Capillaries are narrow diameter tubes that can fit single red blood cells and are the sites for the exchange of nutrients, waste, and oxygen with tissues at the cellular level. Fluid also leaks from the blood into the interstitial space from the capillaries. The capillaries converge again into venules that connect to minor veins that finally connect to major veins. Veins are the blood vessels that bring blood high in carbon dioxide back to the heart. Veins are not as thick-walled as arteries, since pressure is lower, and they have valves along their length that prevents backflow of blood away from the heart. The major drains drain blood from the same organs and limbs that the major arteries supply. In summary, animal respiratory systems are designed to facilitate gas exchange. In mammals, air is warm and humidified in the nasal cavity. Air then travels down the pharynx and larynx through the trachea and into the lungs. In the lungs, air passes through the branching bronchi, reaching the respiratory bronchioles. The respiratory bronchioles open up in the alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, and alveoli. Because there are so many alveoli, alveolar sacs in the lung, the surface area for gas exchange is very large. The mammalian circulatory system is a closed system with double circulation passing through the lungs and the body. It consists of a network of vessels containing blood that circulates because the pressure differences generated by the heart. The heart contains two pumps that move blood through the pulmonary and systemic circulation. There is one atrium and one ventricle on the right side, and one atrium and one ventricle on the left side. The pumping of the heart is a function of cardiomyocytes, distinctive muscle cells that are striate like skeletal muscle, but pump rhythmically and involuntarily like smooth muscle. The signal for contraction begins in the wall of the right atrium. The electrochemical signals causes the two atria to contract in unison. Then the signal causes the ventricles to contract. The blood from the heart is carried through the body by a complex network of blood vessels. Arteries take blood away from the heart, and veins bring blood back to the heart. And now, answer the following questions. Describe the function of these terms and describe where they are located. Name bronchus, trachea, alveoli. How does the structure of alveoli maximize gas exchange? Describe the cardiac cycle.